I said, "What? How do you know all this stuff? What advice would you have for me, Martin?" He said, "Read whatever you happen to like at the time."
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and I am here with the Core 4 group, Martin, Tanya, and Paul.
I have not heard that before.
Core
Four.
Did we?
Martin, yes, you have.
Yes, you have.
You know, in our
Well, it just went in.
Was it meaningful?
well, in our text chat this morning, when I was trying to come up with, I couldn't come up with it, and I said the regular 4.
I saw
and I knew
that.
something was wrong, but I couldn't come up with what it was. The core 4.
There's some equivocation in that core 4. Core, it could mean like 3 different things, all of which we want it to mean.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I like it.
All of which we want it to mean.
Yes,
They're all positive.
yeah, they're all positive. You know, the core curriculum, the core, that we're a group of 4. You could
The apple
spend that.
core.
No, no, not that.
It reaches an
the
end.
apple core has seeds that need to be planted in little children's minds.
Oh, gosh. Okay,
It's
now
really-
we're getting a
Hang
little
on.
sappy.
Paul, let's start with you. Are you getting into any reading as fall is upon us?
I just finished.
The days are getting shorter?
yesterday. Yes, they are, and it's very
Right.
helpful because
Yeah.
then I'm in from chores significantly earlier because
Right.
there is no light, and then I have time to read. So I did just finish The Chosen, and which was great. I felt I was more impacted in the first reading of it than I was in the second.
Really?
But also, I think it's because of my life circumstances. Like I when I read it before, I had time to just sit there and kind of simmer in it and think about it all. And now I'm just sort of like, there's a deadline of how quickly I have to get it done. My life is crazy right now, so I think that probably has something to do with it.
Right.
But there were things, particularly at the end, I was like, I need to go back and think about this deeply,
Which you'll do
which I will
before
do.
the book club.
No, at the book club. That's when I will think deeply about it.
Well, you need to think deeply before that, so you are a good participant in the book club, which I'm not even going to be there. So, and
What?
I've loved the book.
Oh.
Now
Oh.
I'm going to visit Christian Book and Rainbow.
Oh, you're gone all next week.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm going on a little tour across Boston and then Peoria.
Wow. Some variety.
It is.
But I am back to my reading. My intent after this is now to pick up Sharp's Tiger again and finish that because I
I don't
interrupted
know how
it
you
for the
do
Chosen.
that. How you put a book down. I don't put a book down very well.
It's I don't feel like I do either. It's only for like certain reasons where I'm like, if I don't start this book now, I'm not gonna have it done by my deadline, and so I've got to
Right.
dedicate others. So
I did put War and Peace down, if you'll recall, in between volumes because I didn't want to carry it
You
on
had a trip.
Right.
right.
Well, it's hard to pick up again.
Yes.
Warren.
Physically.
Yes. Well, I did it though.
Yeah.
Because I had a deadline.
Yeah, deadlines are helpful.
They are helpful.
In some ways hurtful.
Right. Because now you haven't contemplated it like you would have
Mhm.
if you hadn't had
True.
a deadline.
How about you, Tanya?
I read the first Le Carré book
Did you?
that Mitchell suggested at our last podcast. Yes, and I loved it. And I've ordered the second one. I didn't order all of them like he did.
Which one did you read?
I read the first George Smiley one,
Okay.
the very first one, and now I'm going to read the second one. I really, really liked them. Liked it.
Just fluff though, right? I mean, this is just
It's really kind of highbrow fluff, but
Yeah.
yes, it's
highbrow
Yeah.
fluff.
It
I agree with
is.
that.
It is. I mean,
Could start a
it's
new
like,
podcast.
It's
We're
kind of
coming
like
up with all bunch of great terms today. Is somebody taking these down?
it's not too complicated, the story, but it does deal with it really does deal with some, like toward the end, there's this where he ends up killing somebody that he had worked with. And it's a bad guy, but still just his, why did you should have shot me so I wouldn't have had to kill you. That. So it is a little bit more thought-provoking, kind of like Foyle's War, I would say. Would you say? Martin? Kind of.
Yeah. Well, the only thing about the Jean Le Carré novels are that they're sort of noirish. I mean, and I don't know if this is the impression I get from reading it or from having seen some of the dramatizations they've done on public television, or I think it's maybe the BBC, where it's a dark and foggy night,
Right.
and all the events take place in this very kind of dark mood, atmosphere. And so what was the one you asked me to compare it to?
Foyle's War.
Yeah, Foyle's War is not that way.
Right.
And that's not. Is that a novel? Was that a novel?
No.
I didn't think so.
I don't know.
That was a BBC television,
I watched the show,
which
but it
love.
reminded me very much of this book that I just read.
Right. Well, there in Foyle's, there's not really intrigue like there is in.
Right. It's just solving a mystery.
Novels.
Right. Solving a
But it is. He's a just straight up detective in a little small British town.
But it gets mixed up with the war.
Yes, right. Yeah, there's always that lurking international background to it.
Right.
Right.
Martin, what about you?
I am. I think I was on this book last time, Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, which I just love. I think I mentioned this before. I had read Washington Square and another one of his short novels,
Daisy Miller,
and I like them, but this one, of course, is a large novel, and I think I think I like him better in a larger novel format or whatever. But he is such a precise writer, and I wish I could remember. There's an expression T.S. Eliot used about Henry James. He had a mind so fine that no idea could get through it. And I thought, that sounds like a criticism, but it was not. He was just commenting on the precision with which he writes so that he says exactly what he means.
Kind of airtight.
It's airtight. And for some readers wouldn't like that. But I really do. And I don't really know what the novel is about other than the 9 or 10 chapters I'm into it. Or actually more than about 15. And so I don't really know what to expect, but it just seems to be tracking what the title says. It's the portrait of this lady. And of course, James he lived in America and in Britain, and he was very familiar with both cultures. And so a lot of the novel is about the way Americans think and the way the British think. And there's some funny scenes even in it, but it's just this Isabel whose mother has died, and her aunt who's been living in Italy away from her husband who lives in England. She comes to get Isabel, and they go to visit her father in England. And it's just the events that ensue. And she's very attractive. She's got a wonderful personality. Everybody loves her. And just all the things that happen. And I'm looking at that, I think particularly as a male, and thinking, that doesn't sound really exciting to me. It's the subtleties too much. Well, I really like it. I like it a lot. So
I need to reread it. I haven't read Henry James in a long time. And I remember when I read him, I liked Trollope better. I like other authors better, but that doesn't mean I didn't like him.
Well, they're very British too.
Yes.
And they're not conscious about their being British. They just are. And whereas James is kind of able to kind of step outside the British way of thinking and look at it.
Okay. Well, you've made me want to read him again.
And when you were talking to me the other day about Washington Square, that novel sounded the way you described that one as opposed to the way you just described Portrait of a Lady. I would probably rather pick up Washington Square. I think. Well,
in Washington Square, there is and I wish I could. A movie was made of that. When in the classic Hollywood era, was made of Washington, but it's not called Washington Square. It's called something else. And I think Montgomery Clift plays the young man, because that's about a young man who's coming and sort of courting this young girl, and the father is looking at this, and the father, I think it's his only child, and she's dull. He's wondering why anyone would love her. And the young man seems to see something in her that he really likes. And the father is doubtful about this because there's a lot of money coming to this girl when he dies. So he's suspicious that this guy is on the make, and it's not revealed to you throughout the whole novel. And I can't remember now since I've seen the movie, but in the book, I don't remember it being very clear about that at all, even to the end. And yet in the movie, it seems to tip the hat a little bit at the end in terms of what he was really about. But the movie was also very good. And I'm trying to think of the actress that's in it. I think it was Montgomery Clift who played the young man. But a great story.
Mm-hmm.
My wife didn't like it because she didn't like the girl.
Oh, interesting. I love the idea of being able to argue afterwards about what the guy's intentions actually were.
Mhm.
Like that sort of ambiguity.
Well, it makes it a mystery.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's sort of a textual mystery of,
right.
you know, and, you know, I can sit down with somebody and we can take different sides and just
Mhm.
argue about something inconsequential but fun.
Yeah, I've read all three of those books, and I don't know which one I would want to reread. I would choose to reread first.
Well, I don't remember liking Washington Square all that much, but after seeing the movie, I think I not only liked the movie, but I liked the book a little more.
The other thing, the other author I'd like to reread that I haven't read in years and can't really remember what I thought about the book is I'd like to reread Vanity Fair by Thackeray.
I read it once,
Did
and
you
I
not
think I'm
like
going
it?
to leave it at that.
Yes. I feel like I liked it the first time, but I want to revisit it, but it's a big book.
It is a big book. Yeah, more power to you. I'm going to sit here on the sidelines and
I think
Let
I
you
read
do it for
Henry
me.
James and Thackeray in the same year.
okay.
What a year.
Those are-
What a year. Yeah.
Oh, well, on to today's topic. We are going to be discussing how to encourage the life of the mind, because we hear from so many people in the Memoria Press community that you really want to pursue the intellectual life. So we thought we would sit down and talk to you about tips for how we do that, how to do that intentionally every day in the midst of a busy life. And Paul, I want to start with you, because pursuing the intellectual life and enriching your mind isn't just reading big books.
Mhm.
So what
Correct.
is it?
You know, I was just on the phone with Dr. Vegan Goroyan, and he made this comment that in his career, he had taught, I think he said something like 50 different courses. And he said, it's insane. He said, but I'm just a curious person. And I wanted to teach a course. You have to know that material very, very well. And by coming up with new courses every year, I was effectively like sating my curiosity.
And educating himself. But sort of his orientation towards the world was, I want to know it, right? He was not content to just go, I have a general grasp on what's going on, and I'm happy to live my life that way. No, like I want to know everything about this world that I can know. I feel like Cheryl was like that too. Cheryl Lowe. I think she really did have that curiosity and wanted to know about everything.
But I mean, she would show that in wanting to know the names of the trees in her woods.
Yes, but also
in she would you'd say, what do you think about this book? She'd go home and read that book that night.
She would.
And come back to you the next day.
And she had the ability to do that, to read a whole book
yes.
intensively in
Yes.
one session, which I cannot.
Yes, but her husband said she never did. She didn't even know their refrigerator quit working.
Yeah.
That was his big joke, was the refrigerator's been broken for 2 years and Cheryl doesn't know it.
And he would know because he was a refrigeration guy. Yeah.
That's funny.
Refrigeration company.
But I do think that, it's when we talk about the life of the mind, right?
Mhm.
And we talk about educating people in the liberal arts, right? Like we want to free the mind. We like, and effectively what we mean by that is we want to help people be in, have this just general attitude of this sort of liberty of knowledge, right? That whether that is a bookish knowledge and experiential knowledge, because I could read all day long about wildlife, but when I go out for my runs and I see in the fields new wildlife. I mean, the other day, this shows how bad of a farmer I am. But we're going like in the middle, like in the night after we're trying to get our dog kenneled because she's in heat and we don't want another litter of puppies, and we're going through the cattle herd, and I'm like, wait, that's a new calf. When did that calf get born?
Oh.
I mean, it was like a day or two after it had been born. I had no idea. I knew this mama was pregnant and I knew it was coming soon, but my life had taken me a different direction. But just to sit there and wonder and go, like new life, it's amazing, right? But that's I have sat there and learned in sort of a bookish or even video based knowledge of what does it take to birth a calf. Like I know this, right? I've seen it happen, but like actually being there, like seeing that new calf is a wholly different experience. I think the life of the mind, we're talking all of that, right? This is a whole human endeavor, not just do I eke out an hour to read a day.
Do you think that, I may take this in a whole different direction, but it just, something you said made me think when you were talking about reading, do you think that, you were talking about freeing the mind. Do you think that we can do that if we only read authors, things that we agree with that are in, or do we have to go beyond that?
I think
maybe at first some people do need to stick with books that sort of comport with their own view.
Yeah,
of the
you got to
world.
get your feet under you.
You got to get your feet under you. It's because if you're not already a serious reader and you want to become a serious reader, you have to wade in. Being shoved in the pool from the diving board to learn how to swim is not. It may work. Well, it doesn't even work there. I can say from experience. And you don't want to jump in the deep end. It's not a good place to start swimming. It's not a good place to start reading. And so I think you need to start, number one, with easier works that you will be able to understand better, which means they'll probably comport with what you already think on some things. And you also need to do shorter works. Okay. If you're going to, I would like to read John Steinbeck. Don't read East of Eden first. Read Tortilla Flat or Of Mice and Men or something shorter to acclimate yourself. And we haven't gotten to this yet, but, reading widely. And it's easier to read widely if you're just reading shorter works from the great authors, because you can take care of a bunch of authors in a fairly short period of time. So I would just say in terms of acclimating yourself to it, you need to start with shorter, easier works that are things that you can understand.
But I do think
You didn't answer my question.
I do think you absolutely like you want to acclimate yourself, but I think when you find that freedom, right? Like when that freedom of mind, when you embrace that, you are going to read things that you don't agree with. I read things I don't agree with every single day. And
every day.
I mean, it may not be in a book, but whether they're articles, whether they're, whatever they are, I'm constantly seeing stuff where I'm like, that's got a spin on it, but what's the grain of truth here that person is trying to present to me? And
I was just making the point that when you start out, that's not necessarily something that you want to do too much of.
Right.
Eventually, when you want to know, you're just trying to find out about things, you can't stick with just what you already agree with or what you already know. You need to start challenging your mind by an idea that is something you may disagree with, because it's going to tell you a little bit about your ideas that you think are right. they need to be challenged, and it'll force you to think back on the ideas that you already have. So
right.
that was
and it will hone your ideas, right? Like the ideas that you hold by reading something that you don't agree with forces you to look at your own ideas and go,
yes,
do I really, should I really hold this dogmatically?
Well, that's my question is, have you really freed your mind if you haven't explored things that you aren't going to agree with? Because if you just stay within your lane, then where's the growth? You're just reading things that everybody, but I do agree with you that you've got to set that foundation first, and it needs to be a foundation of what is true to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because if you don't know what's true to you, then you're going to be swayed by.
It'd be a kite in the wind, right? I mean, yeah.
You have to start somewhere, and it might as well be where you are now.
Yeah.
And I wonder if part of a habit of the intellectual mind is surrounding yourself with people who kind of poke at those ideas in really helpful ways.
But not threatening.
Right. Well, and what's interesting about even a core group of people that you read a book with, maybe it's a book that you agree with, but they have counterpoints. That's a really refining process, and it almost diminishes the threat.
Right.
Because you're being refined in a really positive way.
That is a great reason to do a book group, really, and to do it with some people that you don't necessarily all agree with, because that really is a way to explore what a book could mean to different people.
And I mean, I was thinking about our curriculum. I mean, we have authors whose lives we don't agree with, and yet we say we ought to read these books, right? And so you have the question of what's being said, but you also have the question of who's saying it, right? And sometimes you're like, I don't want to pick up that book because I don't agree with that person. But more than likely, if that book is well known and is something that has either been passed on through the ages or is a big topic of conversation, there's something in there that's worth wrestling with. What doesn't mean you have to ever agree with it.
And that's probably the key, is worth wrestling with. You know?
Yeah.
Well, and it also needs to be a book, like you said, that has kind of stood the test of time, because there's a lot of stuff that comes out in contemporary stuff that you disagree with, that's really not worth reading at all. And one of the reasons that's so prevalent is because those books have not stood the test of time. I mean, even the people who may agree with it wouldn't point to it just 5 years, 10 years down the road. And so, but if it has stood the test of time, then people have found something valuable in it. And then, that's worth spending some time on.
Time wears down the marketing effect, right?
Yes.
And marketing can get almost anybody to buy anything. And, but then over time, is this still something we talk about?
Right.
Is there still some idea we're struggling with here? And so, yeah, that's great. I wanted to maybe take this in the direction of something where I fail, which is silence. I bought this book years ago from 8th Day Books called The World of Silence. And I started reading it, and I didn't get all the way through it. But it was just...
It was too loud.
I was just going to make a joke about that.
But it was an amazing call to sort of the life of the mind requires you to sit in silence. And in a world where we're just bombarded by noise every which way.
Our phones,
even,
we don't just sit.
But even like I talk about these runs I've been doing, which has just been amazing, but I'll pop in an earbud and listen to a book as I run.
Yes.
But it might be more beneficial for me just to do that in silence, and I really don't spend almost any time in silence, but I know it's valuable. I've done that in the past. And, if all you're doing is imbibing other people's ideas and you don't sit in silence, you don't have the time to wrestle with those ideas.
And when you think about freedom of the mind, I don't know about you, but there's a sense that when some of my thoughts get untangled the best when I'm just doing something that's not reading or listening to something, there's that kind of quiet mind that is opened up. And you're like, oh yeah, okay, I see that better.
Are you talking about solitude about not having distractions? Is that what
I think bigger than that, but that's a core part of it, right? But I think what Jessica's getting at is I think it's in the book Shopcraft, Soulcraft.
Oh,
I think he makes that point of like when you're working with your hands, whether you're washing dishes or you're welding something or you're whatever it is, if you're in silence, sometimes those ideas just pop in and become lucid in that moment because you're doing something else. You are not focused on it. But I think there's absolutely a needed place for solitude where you are focused on that idea and you're not necessarily trying to read things about it. You may be writing things about it, right? Where you're trying to work out your own ideas about that thing.
Or even just sitting.
Or just sitting
thinking.
and staring off in the distance thinking about it.
Because in terms of actually reading, where you read, you're talking about when sometimes you jog and you put your earbuds. Because I think of where I have to, if I'm going to read and concentrate, I have to do it out on my front porch. I used to do it driving my long drive to work. That was solitude. There were no distractions. I mean, other than driving itself, but that's automatic. If it's automatic for you, then that is solitude. And then now walking, that because I don't have the drive anymore, I actually try to. It's encouraging me. I need to walk more. Number one, just because I need to, and number two, because that's time I can pop the earbuds in and read a book. So I do think solitude is important. So somewhere free of distractions. I even on my porch, I'll have my phone with me, but it's on do not disturb. And
that's why I can never get through to you.
If I need a break, I can check my email or whatever.
Yeah. Any other habits that you can think of that have helped you?
Discussion. Because there are things, I mean, even if I sit through, take for example, a short story and I try to pore over it and I'm underlining and I'm making notes and I'm thinking, what do I think about this? Then when I sit down with somebody else and we talk about that thing, and especially, in a place where we can be loud and it's late at night and we're just ready to, argue over this thing. So many other things become apparent that I never would have thought of. And they then forced me to wrestle with those ideas. And so that community of similarly but differently minded people is important to me. And I don't do it nearly as much. I mean, I try to participate in multiple groups that probably all try to meet quarterly. It's hard to do.
Yes, it is, but it does make you accountable. It does force you to read for a deadline, which is helpful because we're all very busy. And so I find it helpful. And discussion groups, hugely helpful.
I wonder what role books about books serve in reading, because
like commentaries.
No, not well. That was one kind. But for example, I love one of my favorite writers is Joseph Epstein, and he's always writing about books. And in every article, no matter what it's on, even if it's on a contemporary topic, he's quoting books that there's 6 quotes in that article about what he did. And so you can go two ways with that, because one caution is, if you want to read widely, don't read books about reading. Don't depend on reading books about reading widely, because that's not reading widely, right? That's sometimes the tendency. When sometimes we want to do something, we want to read more about doing it than actually doing it, and
exercise.
Yeah, well, right, and books that are about books, I enjoy them much more now that I am widely read than before.
Because you're getting the illusions.
Because I'm getting the illusions. I'm understanding things that the author said that I couldn't have understood.
You've actually read the
things.
people that he's quoting.
Exactly. So they can serve the purpose of kind of getting you, what books would I find interesting? Well, yeah, but don't spend too much time on them at first. Now I can feel like I can spend as much time on them as I want to, because I have a stock of knowledge about those things.
That's like How to Think Like Shakespeare. He's got so many quotes from people I haven't read. It makes me feel ignorant because I'm just like, well, never read that author before. but they're really pithy, good quotes.
Yeah.
But it does make me feel uneducated.
Well, and then that's another point is when you're reading, you'll find things in there, an allusion to some other author or whatever, or some quote, and you'll say, "Oh, that person sounds interesting." Circle
That's
the name,
true.
go follow the
Yes.
links,
Right.
Yes.
follow the links,
Like something in a footnote or an endnote.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I need to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, I think maybe I mentioned this on the show, this little Methodist minister I met at the C.S. Lewis G.K. Chesterton conference in Seattle in 1987, actually. And he was,
What a specific
This is
memory.
Yeah,
I've heard this story before, and I love this story.
well, he was this little Methodist minister. And I mean, Peter Kraft was there. Thomas Howard was
Wow.
there. Walter Hooper, the executive of the C.S. Lewis. And we were all sitting at a table at one point, and somebody said something. He said, "Well, actually," and he started talking, and he talked for about 10 or 15 minutes, and everyone was just entranced by what he was saying. And we walked out, and there was this this scholar, Paradise Lost, Milton. There was this Milton scholar who I had kind of gotten to know, and she was a professor. And we walked out the door. She says, "Who is he?" And he was this little Methodist minister, and I was rooming with him. And so one night, I said, can't even remember his name now. I said, "What? How do you know all this stuff? What advice would you have for me?" And he said, "Martin," he said, "read whatever you happen to like at the time."
Mhm.
And it kind of relates to the following the links,
Yeah.
right? Because you'll see something you're interested in. Well, go ahead and follow that.
Right.
Maybe you have a list of, this was the list and this was the order in which you were going to read them. And that's all fine and dandy. Read what you're interested in at that point in time.
Right.
Because you'll probably actually finish it too.
Right.
Yes.
So that advice stayed with me all these years.
Well,
and
and
that's exactly what I do.
that goes back to the whole idea of curiosity, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
if
It does.
your attitude is oriented towards, I want to know about the world, and that's your drive, then you're going to end up reading so widely because you when you read one thing, it's going to spark another. You go, oh, hey, I want to know more about this.
Right.
But if you don't have that sort of inquisitive nature,
Right.
then you're gonna read one and be like, I checked that box off. Okay.
Because it's hard enough to try to, follow that discipline of reading, and being interested in it makes that easier.
Oh, yes.
So do that. That will help you to read.
But I have read a lot of things that I wasn't interested in.
Yes. Well, and you have to balance it with
Right.
that. Right.
That's right.
Read something. I've talked about that. I have this list of, modern classics Martin should read before he dies. And
Let's make an article out of that.
Well, it probably will be.
right. And those are the books that I don't have an interest in reading.
Right.
So I
But
try
you
to
feel-
balance my reading
That's right.
with
Yeah.
the ones that I'm not interested in reading
Yeah.
that I really should. And
Right.
then I'll find out, oh, I should have been interested in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it takes the curiosity and it takes that discipline,
Yeah.
right? Like you are not living a life of the mind is like also it's in a similar way to caring for your body, right? Like, are you going to get up? Tiny wakes up at some god awful hour every morning to go
Until
walking.
5.
Lord hammer. It starts with a 4. It starts with a
Is
4.
God up that early,
4:50.
Tanya?
4:50.
Okay.
Well, God is up. And he gave me a full moon the past 3 nights,
Oh, wow.
the past 3 mornings, but I'm reading half an hour before I go walk.
Right.
I am literally getting up and reading for half an hour, which I started doing when my kids were really, really little. But it was really at that point the only time I could read.
Yeah.
Right. But it takes that discipline for her to wake up at 4:50, something I will never do.
That's what works for me.
That's what works for you, but you had to find that discipline in the same way that somebody says, hey, like I want my body to be in shape. I'm going to get up at 5:30 and go. I mean,
See, I'm
she's
doing that
she's
too.
doing both. She's getting up at 4:50. She can do the life of the mind and the life of the body, right? Go for her walk. But then also once you do that enough, like, with me trying to start running again, like first few weeks, I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm like, I need to go run.
Right.
And so once you get through that
Then
discipline.
you miss it if you
force
if
the
you
discipline
can't
and
do
then
it.
you miss it. That's right. You
And
miss it.
I love my half hour of reading every morning. I live for that. And sometimes I'll be in bed and it'll be really early, like on a Saturday, and I'll think, I should go back to sleep. And then I think, or I could go to the porch and read longer.
This is really inspiring.
But
you know what?
What?
I'm not going to do that.
No, I think you should. But
Martin reads at night.
I hate exercise.
Mm.
And so that part of my morning I don't enjoy, but I do miss it if I don't do it, which makes no sense at all, really.
I think
It's discipline.
it is.
Right?
And I think
guess so.
one thing that helps me is remembering that it's the cumulative effect that I'm going for.
That's right.
I sat down with a friend this week and I said, my life is so full and there are all these different priorities. And at any given moment, I feel stuck about which one to choose. And if it's something just to enrich me, I feel even more stuck, whether I should choose it or not. And she said, approach that decision like, what cumulative effect do you want? If you always say no to the thing that's easy to just bat away, do you really want the cumulative effect of never choosing that?
Right.
And I think for the intellectual life and enriching your mind, it's the same choices before you. Like, what a cumulative effect do I want in 10 years? And you can apply that to working out too.
You can.
But you think about a homeschooling mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's more important? Is it more important for me to work on organizing their flashcards for the day or whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I take 15 minutes for me to read, right? And if you're taking that 15 minutes for you to read every day, when your kids are in high school, you're going to be way better ready. You're going to be much more ready for that than if you're sacrificing your own life of the mind every day. And so there's a you can't give what you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another key point is it doesn't need to be hours a day.
Right.
15 minutes, you would be amazed what you can read in 15 or 20, if you're just reading 15 or 20 minutes a day. How many books you can get through in a year.
There's another thing too. There's different ways of reading. Okay, and Tanya and I have opposite ways in this respect. Is that
would have guessed?
yeah. She will get one book and she will just power through that book.
Plow
She's
through
not
it.
reading anything else. Whereas I'm reading 3 or 4 or 5
Right.
different books at the same time.
Paul's doing that too. Now-
I prefer to read the way you do,
Right.
but life brings me to the way
But-
Martin does.
I'm okay.
Much more realistic.
I'm okay if I can read, like I'm constantly reading generally a book of fiction that I really want to read. And that is my morning book. But in the evening, I'm also reading another book that is expanding my mind, hopefully. So it could be the Livingston book that we just published. Right now, it's How to Think Like Shakespeare, which I'm getting ready to finish. I'm not sure what I'll do next, but there's always something else that I'm really having to discipline myself to read a chapter a day. Because that is where I am expanding my mind and where I am. That is the discipline required for me to get up and read East of Eden in the morning. That is no struggle at all. I looked forward to reading books like that. I look forward to reading Dickens, and I would look forward to reading Henry James again. But to read a book of nonfiction that will broaden my mind and my intellect that requires discipline, and it's not always fun, and I don't always enjoy it.
And I think that reading many books is an extension of that idea of what are you interested in? Because if I've got those 5 books stacked there and I think, well, I'm more interested in reading that one. So I'll read that one. And again,
But you even will read 2 fiction books at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
I would never do that.
I'm probably in the middle of 3 of those, right?
Oh, I could not. I don't know how you keep that straight.
I can do 1 in audio and 1 in physical book.
I can do that.
I can keep that going.
I can do that.
But no, if I have 2 fiction books, one of them is going to end up taking. It's the only thing I'll read over, and then that's what happened to Sharp's Tiger. I started reading Sharp's Tiger, and I was like, no, I need to go read The Chosen. So I went and finished Chosen. Now I'll go back to Sharp Tiger, but I can't be doing like every other day.
Right.
Like,
So
what?
whatever you pick up, right?
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is fiction versus nonfiction.
Well,
Right.
that's my thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who do not read fiction at all. And I think this is a character deficit.
I think that's a whole episode in itself. We should do
Right.
an
Yeah, we
episode
should
on
do
that because I totally
interesting.
agree with you. I think we should do an episode
Mhm.
on the value of fiction, the necessity of fiction.
Let's do it.
Let's do that.
Okay.
What a cliffhanger. Maybe it'll be next week.
Well, and we're going to do The Chosen. No,
Right.
don't do that one next week
Okay.
because I won't be here.
Okay.
So,
We'll save it for you.
yeah. When should we do The Chosen? When should we talk about The Chosen?
I have not read The Chosen.
I haven't
I'm not in that
either.
reading
Oh,
group.
you've got to read it. It's
Mm.
brilliant.
I'll put it on my stack.
No, don't put it on your stack. Put it at the top because we want to talk about it. And Paul and I will forget.
And it's the only thing you can read.
That's right. It's short. It's short. Easy.
Yeah, you'd get through it in a few days.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay.
But
Put that.
it'll be.
So let's do that in a
couple
couple of weeks so that
Okay.
people can also read with you.
Yeah.
Paul and I have done our homework. Have you read it?
I haven't.
Oh, you've got to read it too.
I will.
Okay.
I
You'll
will.
have a
Yeah.
couple weeks.
Okay. I'll pick it up somewhere.
Whatever you do next week, make it a boring topic since I won't be here.
So all of our
Wow.
listeners tune in to the boring topic next
That's right.
week.
Do math or something.
Do math.
Ooh.
Oh, math keeps the world spinning.
Uh-huh.
So, well, thank you to all our accountants out there who are listening because we need you. Oh, and thank you for joining us. We will be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.